Welcome to Rome. This is The Bittersweet Life with Katie Sewell and Tiffany Parks. Hello, this is The Bittersweet Life. I'm Katie Sewell.
I'm Tiffany Parks.
Tiffany in Rome, Katie in Seattle. And today, we're going to delve into something a little unexpected. An article recently put out by NPR, National Public Radio, the title of which caught my attention right away. It said, "Ancient Greek and Roman statues often smelled like roses, a new study says."
I'm dying to know how they figured this out. Like, surely any trace of perfume would be long gone, but maybe it's something in a written source. Where did they come up with this?
So, whether you've traveled in Europe or not, you've certainly seen ancient or even Renaissance statues. They're often marble, they're often white. Sometimes they are a different color if they're made from a different kind of stone, but they're most likely white in our imaginations, these old statues. And so the article begins by saying, researchers have known for many years that the Greek and Roman statues that look like plain white marble could have been originally in very vibrant colors. And in recent years, various exhibitions have been put on where they project colors. They've actually done this on Notre Dame as well, where they project colors, the colors that they might have been, onto these white statues so that the visitor could see what they might have looked like if they had seen these statues when they were new. And of course, when they first started talking about the fact that they would be painted, didn't it make sense to you, Tiffany, in a way when we've walked through so many galleries where it's just one marble head after another marble head after another marble head, and they have no eyes, so they have like no personality. And when you start to think like, oh, maybe at one time the eyes were painted in, and this person actually looked like they were looking at you, it would be a totally different experience. It takes goes from kind of being a soulless head to like, oh, the head of a guy that we might all recognize.
Well, interesting you say that, because that was one of the things that I was going to mention, because you said, before we started taping, you said, do you have any other things that you know about that are different than how we would assume as moderns? And I immediately thought of the glass eyes, the glass or marble eyes that the sculptures used to have. So if you've, they were not all the same, but they all had some kind of eye. And usually it was glass. Sometimes marble. And there are a few of these left. And if you go to the Vatican museums, there are at least 2 statues that still have their glass eyes or marble eyes. And there's one that's very arresting in the Capitoline museums, especially because it's a bronze bust of Brutus, Janus Brutus, not the one who assassinated Julius Caesar, but his ancestor, who was actually a great Roman hero. And it's a very serious looking man. It's actually an incredible work of art. Like, it's the kind of thing that you just sort of stop in your tracks in front of, even if you have no idea what it is. And I believe it's from the 2nd century BC. I mean, it's old. 2nd or 3rd century BC. It's bronze, and it has marble eyes that are very, like, the white of the marble is very bright and shiny. And then there's a black pupil and iris that is also very shiny. So it actually freaks people out when they see them for the first time. When I used to take people through the Vatican museums and I would show them the statues that still had the eyes, and they always kind of like didn't. Most people were like, "Ugh, that's weird. Like that freaks me out." But the truth is that the eyeless ones are, I think, freakier, because it's like they have no eyes, and you can't read any kind of expression really without eyes. So yeah, I think it would make a big difference. It's hard for me to imagine like a bust of like Caracalla with brown hair painted on and flesh-colored skin painted on. I believe the archaeologists, because they all say that, but it is hard to imagine, because in our minds, not only do we see them when we travel, but in our minds, you think of these ancient works of art as just being this pure white marble, and even the buildings were painted, which is, I think, even crazier. And I know, as being a tour guide, when I tell people, the temples were often painted bright colors, or the palaces, they're like, no, like, they don't believe me. You can't even picture it. It just seems so bizarre.
it also makes these ancient places seem like they would have looked so much more festive than they do now. Right now, they're almost
Yes.
like the pillars of grandeur, and if they were
Yeah, it's
painted in
like it's
stripes and polka
definitely
dots, we'd be like, well, what the heck? What kind of clown lives
definitely
here?
ancient Rome was clearly more Las Vegas than like Washington D.C. It was more on that side. Like if you go into Caesar's Palace and it's like, it's gaudy, over the top gaudy. I mean, maybe that's how Rome was.
Huh.
Probably, they decorated everything. And if you've ever seen the Arapacis, which is a beautiful, enormous altar in Rome that has been housed now in a modern museum with glass walls, and you can peek in at it even if you don't visit the museum. That was supposedly painted as well. It's intricately carved with garlands and fruit and flowers and insects. And they did an exhibit similar to what you were talking about, where they give everybody. I don't even think that you had to have virtual reality glasses. I think there were lights shining on it that would show you the bright colors, which I thought was really cool.
That is cool. Of course, how do they know which colors it was?
How do they know? Yeah.
Maybe they
Well,
were
I'm
just like,
guessing that the garlands would be green,
yeah,
but
so they're like,
who
it's a
knows?
grasshopper. I mean, right? It's got to be. But maybe they were really weird and clever, and all grasshoppers were bright purple.
Tiffany popping in. If current events in the United States, or wherever you live, have been getting you down, I suggest getting some travel plans on the horizon. I don't know about you, but if I have an exciting trip to look forward to, my whole day is just a little bit sunnier. Katie and I are planning our 2025 Roman adventure for this coming October, the 5th to the 11th. This will be our third time hosting this unforgettable and really magical trip. We have had such an amazing time and such an amazing response from our guests these past 2 years to this trip that we put together that we feel is truly out of the ordinary. This is not your typical Roman trip. This is, first of all, a very small group of people. We're capping it at 14 people this year, and it'll probably be closer to 10. We're staying at a beautiful, luxurious hotel where I got married, by the way. That's how beautiful this place is. We will be taking you personally to some of the most exquisite, beautiful sights of Rome, many of which are so rare and so unknown that even though the city might be crowded, we will be almost alone in some of these places. Katie and I pride ourselves on our knowledge of Rome, our deep understanding of its culture and its art, and the secrets that most people don't know about. If you'd like to spend a week in Rome with us and with a handful of other listeners in this beautiful hotel, then come to Rome with us in October. It will be an unforgettable trip, and it might just be one of the best trips of your life, as some of our previous guests have told us it was. Get in touch with us on our website, thebittersweetlife.net, or you can send us an email, bittersweetlifepodcast@gmail.com, and we're happy to answer all of your questions. The dates again are the 5th to the 11th of October. Rooms are filling up, and it's a very, very small group. So if you'd like to come with us to discover a side of Rome that most people will never see, then get in touch, and we'll see you in October. Ciao.
Well, okay, so back to this article. So the researchers now say there's another aspect to these statues that we need to consider, and that is how they smelled. And to tell you how they've come up with this, they say that, so Cecile Bronze, I might be pronouncing her name wrong, who's a senior researcher and curator at a museum collecting Greek and Roman art in Copenhagen, says that ancient texts provide evidence that the statues were often scented with perfumes and oil and waxes. So, and here's...
That is crazy. Why?
Well,
Like,
here's
what's the purpose?
Here's what she writes in her article about it. Quote, such scents could function as a way of creating a sensorial experience and even facilitating interaction between the image and the observer without the use of touch. Let's see. Previous research has shown that these statues were painted and sometimes were decorated with jewelry and textiles, she also writes. But the adding of scents, quote, would have made the experience of them not only a visual but also an olfactory one. Still, why? That does not solve that question for me. Do we miss the fact that, we walk next to a statue now and we're like, it doesn't smell like anything. I don't feel a thing.
Smell like yeah. How disappointing.
How disappointing.
The statue doesn't smell like roses.
She gives some examples. She says that, she discovered a recipe for one of the perfumes, which just translated into perfume made from roses. She also found where it was written that a statue of Zeus at Olympia was treated with olive oil.
Olive oil?
Uh-huh. She talks about a statue of Artemis where people regularly anointed her with precious unguents and crowned her with chaplets and flowers. And then it says, quote, clearly shows that perfumes and flower wreaths were used for cult images as well. So, I mean...
I get the anointing. I get the anointing because they were gods, right?
Right, and
they
so
were
you're kind of
the
like...
representations of the gods. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like
yes.
Maybe the same way that they give flowers to the statue of Mary on certain days, of the year in Rome.
I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
And also in, I feel like in India, they decorate certain statues of deities with flowers. I feel like I saw that in India. Now, I hope I'm not remembering wrong. Mm-hmm. But I feel like that was a thing in India.
I mean, they certainly decorated temples all over Bali with flowers every single day. Fresh flowers, for sure. Of course, they point out that physical evidence of scents on statues is very hard to come by because oils and waxes degrade over time. They say the one exception is a statue of the Ptolemaic Queen Beatrice II from 3rd century BC. They say previous research did not detect a scent, but it did detect evidence of beeswax being spread on that statue. So,
wow.
But yeah, they do think it was partly, according to this article, partly a ritual act of veneration of cult images that often had these things where people would spread oils and waxes on it. They probably also did it to preserve the statues and their paint, to try to give it a coating.
Got it.
Clearly, it didn't preserve the paint, or we just stopped doing it at some point. We're like, enough. But anyway, I don't know. That's sort of interesting. So it made me ask you the question, if we can discover that statues were colored and perfumed like roses, rather than sort of white and stoic like they are today, or we can discover that dinosaurs had feathers, what else do we see that we think it's this one way and it actually would have been some other way? And I asked you if you, with your great knowledge of tour guide knowledge, if you could think of anything else where what we see is not what it would have been.
Honestly, I've really mentioned the main ones that popped out to me. The only other one, it's not necessarily a discovery. It's it's been known for a long time, but it's surprising, I think, to tourists, is that most of the aqueducts of Rome were entirely underground. Or almost entirely underground.
Because you can see them, like you can walk out into the countryside and see them kind of like arcing almost like a bridge across the countryside.
Those are very rare. The ones that are above ground are actually very rare. I think maybe 2, maybe 3 are above ground. Yeah, I think 3. And maybe some branches, some like shoot-offs of those 3. But most of them were almost entirely underground, so you don't see them in the outskirts. And of course, in the city as well. They all went underground with the exception of the Aqua Virgo and maybe one other that you can see little traces of here and there in the city if you know where to look. But I thought that was an interesting thing that a lot of people don't know. I don't know. I can't think of anything else, although I'm sure there are many other things, maybe in other cultures as well.
Yeah, I mean, 2 other things that they say that's interesting in this article is that they say that, part of the smell might have been because they would believe in ancient times that the smells would rise up to where the gods were, and so you're trying to like create, it's the same idea of like sacrificing as many animals as you read about in the Bible. It's like you're making a sacrifice and that smell is rising up to where the god or gods are above you. It's your way of sort of reaching out. So if you perfume this statue, it's you being like, I'm down here covering you with roses.
I can see that. I can see that.
And she says, there's religion embedded in everything in the ancient world. She's like, there isn't really a concept of the secular.
I would agree with that. Having so little understanding of science, what do you turn to for answers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You turn to a higher power. I try to get that concept across on my tours sometimes. And I'm not talking about ancient times. I'm even just talking about like 500 years ago, 400 or 500 years ago. I talk about Caravaggio a lot. If you know anything about Caravaggio, he's a pretty bad guy. He liked to duel. He killed a guy. He frequented prostitutes. He had a bad temper, beat people up all the time. And you think, oh, yeah, he was this bad guy. He had to paint these religious scenes because, the church was paying. And so he had no choice. But the truth is, I think even people like Caravaggio were probably deeply religious because it was a time in which that was just the way of life. It was very rare to find someone who would have been what we call an atheist. I think they were very, very rare because what other option did you have to what other thing was presented to you as a possibility of how we all got here? So I think it's only pretty recently that atheism has been, or even agnosticism, has been a thing, secularism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it raises that question about if the statues were colored and scented rather than marble and stoic looking and unscented. What is that? A lack of imagination where we don't think maybe what we're seeing was different at one point? I mean, obviously, if you're looking at a ruin, you're like, okay, that was different at one point.
Yeah.
But it's almost like we can imagine history and what it might have been like to live in history to a certain level, but we somehow can't imagine what the sense might have, like, what would you have been smelling? It's like we can't fill in all of the senses.
I don't really want to smell what they were smelling, except for the rose scented statues. I'll smell those, but everything else, I think I'd rather not. I think we can't even imagine how bad people smelled.
Yeah.
Back in even a couple hundred years ago.
Yeah, that's true. When toothbrushing wasn't even a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, when there was no deodorant, there was no, you were lucky if you bathed every couple weeks. The Romans bathed a lot, but that, the medieval people did not.
Yeah,
Bathing, changing your clothes. There's the famous story about Michelangelo who didn't change his clothes or his boots the entire time he was working on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, which was 4 years.
Oh,
never bathed, never washed his hair in the entire time.
Gosh, imagine how gross he would have felt every morning.
I know, but I think I can only assume you just get used to that. That's your normal.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, I had also asked you if you could think of an example of something that historians hundreds of years from now might come across and misunderstand what something was like. And, I was thinking, what would be a good example of this in the city of Seattle? And of course, it can't be something like, the only thing people really know about Seattle, if you've never been here and you know very little about the city of Seattle in the United States in general, is maybe that it has a thing called the Space Needle, which is a, vaguely futuristic looking needle point in the middle of the city. It's definitely iconic. I can't really think of a symbol that people associate more with the city of Seattle. Even assuming that the Space Needle is still standing hundreds of years from now, which I don't think we can necessarily guarantee, there would be enough documentation, I feel, where if they came across it, they would be like, what in the world is this? Like, I think they'd be able to figure out, like, oh, this was built for some exhibition. I feel like they'd be able to figure it out. So I was like, well, what would be a thing that they would come across in Seattle that would be puzzling enough? And I started thinking about this alleyway that we have that already feels like you're walking back in time a little bit. It's called Post Alley, and it's very dark and sort of cave-like in one section of it. And the walls are brick, and the ground is stone. And so it already feels like, oh, we've dug down to an ancient level of the city of Seattle. We've unearthed this area, this what seems to be an old alley or an old street. And for whatever reason, there's this weird, colorful, maybe it's not even colorful anymore, this weird substance all over the bricks and all over the ground. And some of it's stringy and some of it seems like it's in some sort of a shape. And some of it's obviously cracked, or maybe all of it has fallen off the walls and it's just in weird piles of different colors. And they'd be like, what is all this? Like, what kind of a thing were they doing down here? And I could see people puzzling over it for years and never figuring it out. And I could see by Tiffany's concerned brow that she's not even sure what I'm talking about. But what I'm talking about, if you do come to Seattle, is one of our grossest attractions. One that people definitely come and look for, which is the notorious Seattle gum wall. And the gum wall, back in the day, when I was a younger person in the city of Seattle, was just one section of wall. It was just a small section of brick wall where someone waiting in line to go into a theater that is also down in this alleyway took out their gum and stuck it to the wall. And over time, more people took out their gum and stuck it to the wall. And then there came to be this one section of wall that was covered in gum. And that used to be a big enough attraction for people to go seek out the Seattle gum wall. But Tiffany, now that it's really an attraction, the gum wall is not one small section. It now goes all the way up one side of the alley, all the way down the other side of the alley. It's all over the ground. You can walk on it. It doesn't stick to your feet because it's so dirty that the gum is just sort of plastered into the ground. And, you know, people purposefully like pull the gum way out, you know, like chew it up, pull it way out and hang it like dangling. Some people try to shape it into their initials, all different colors. It's objectively absolutely disgusting, especially in a post-COVID world.
Yeah.
People are adding to it all the time. Like every time I walk through Post Alley, there are people taking their picture in front of the gum wall and adding their own gum. It's a major seller of gum. But I do think, what purpose, if this was to be come across, 500 years from now, if it hasn't completely biodegraded, which it might have, what purpose would people ever think what was happening in this alleyway?
That's a good one. That is insane. I would never have guessed that, like, while you were describing it. I was like, what in the world? I was trying to think of something, but I couldn't. I was thinking, is it like some kind of art installation with like, that spray, what is that spray stuff that they spray like at parties?
Foam or something? Oh, like silly string.
Spray string, yeah. I was like thinking that was what it was, but made into some kind of art. But
I mean, it is objectively at this point, in some ways, an art installation. It has those same elements. That's debatable,
Katie. That's debatable.
Hundreds of people have contributed their DNA to this art project. Can you think of anything that you would come across? A
physical thing like that?
In modern day Rome, I guess. Maybe that would be puzzling in the future.
I can't think of anything. Definitely nothing that odd.
It doesn't have to be that odd.
I mean, yeah, little is. But... I mean, Rome has changed. It has changed a lot, and it has changed not. That's the paradox of Rome. It's unchanging, but it's always changing. But as you walk around the city, it definitely looks a lot older than most cities.
It does, yeah,
clearly. So I don't know. I can't. I mean, I'm sure there is something, but I can't think of it off the top of my mind. When you asked me that question, I thought of not necessarily a physical place, but sort of a thing that people do, a thing that people do that I think would confuse. I mean, hopefully it will confuse modern, people in the future. Hopefully we won't be still doing it, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
So, and therefore it will confuse people. I think it's this whole like over photographing of everything, especially with yourself in it. Mostly, not always, but this just like people who travel to a place for the photo.
To the gum wall.
To the gum wall.
For the photo.
I mean, it's almost not quite as bad to go to the gum wall because at least you are participating in the creation of the gum wall. So like, not that I'm into the gum wall, but I can it's almost better than the people who spend, because when we were in Austria a couple years ago, I had seen photographs of this beautiful little town. I think it's called Hallstatt. And, you kind of see it everywhere. You see it on travel brochures, you see it on Instagram. And I thought, oh, I would love to see that little town. And so I looked into going there while we were in Austria, and it was just so hard to get to. Like it was like half a day or a full day to get there. Like the trains didn't go there. You'd have to rent a car, or you'd have to take like three different trains. And the hotels were super expensive, and so we decided not to go. But lots and lots of people go, and that's why the hotel prices are so high. And people go from some articles that I read. I mean, they make like a trek to get to this little town. And I'm not saying everybody, okay? But a lot of people who go to this town, they go so that they can take a photo at this one spot, which is, of course, the photo that we've all seen of the little river and the beautiful little church steeples and the rolling hills and the snow, if it's snow time. And they all take the same picture. And I just feel like, is that the only reason you came here? Just to
Hopefully
take a
not.
photo?
Hopefully not. Hopefully
No,
not.
I think a lot of people do. I think a lot of people do.
Still,
That's what it's about. Yeah.
interesting. Hopefully it's also the journey.
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I sometimes see manufactured plastic products that, are like some weird cartoon character or something. And I think someone will come across that someday, and be like, what character is this? And does it end up on the museum shelf, Peppa Pig or something, like sitting in a shelf next to ancient artifacts, as like an example of human art during the 21st century,
Maybe.
It's possible.
I don't know. We do see, you can, if you go to certain museums in Rome, you can see little dolls and dice.
Yes.
And I want to say Palazzo Altemps has those. And that's interesting. It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to imagine a time, especially with our excessive amount of stuff, because of course in ancient Rome, there's no mass production of anything. So everything that was made was going to be made in much, much smaller quantities, and people had less stuff because stuff was expensive because it wasn't being mass produced. So you might have one doll, as a child instead of 10
Yeah.
as like we have today. And so I feel like there's fewer. I feel like if we were to go way forward in the future, there would be such an excessive amount of stuff from our time that hasn't biodegraded because it's all made of plastic. There would just be so much of it that none of it would possibly be considered art or even interesting enough to put into a museum about human culture, because it's just everywhere. It's just in all the landfills. Whereas a little ivory die or a little straw, not straw, because that would be totally, I don't know what the dolls are made of. But that's so, it's so rare because there's hardly any of them left. So we treasure them and we put them behind glass in museums.
All right. Well, it's nice to think next time I'm in Rome, this coming October, I'm going to think of some of these statues as being perfumed. Like when you and I go down into that, when we go down underground, we're going on a Rome trip with some of our listeners. You can be one of those people. And one of the journeys that we take is into this underground area that's a very old temple to the god
Mitra. Part of it is an ancient Mithraeum, which is a temple to the god Mithra or Mitra. But yeah, it's old. It's like first century, I would say.
So we know that the altar that we see way underground there was probably and often bathed in blood from a sacrificed animal. But perhaps we need to consider more what scent that would have been, or if there were any dots of rose along the way to make it somehow lighter down there or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good thought. Obviously, the scent that we smell down there is not what they would have smelled because it wouldn't have been underground, or at least not as far underground for them. But there is a very distinct smell when you go down there of that dank underground ancient place.
Yes.
I happen to love that smell in the right context. Like I wouldn't want that smell in my bathroom.
Right, because then you'd have a mold problem.
Yes.
Well, if you want to come to Rome with us, we do have some spots available. We're going October 5th to the 11th, 2025. It's going to be a magical week. Tiffany and I taking you on walking tours. One of those taking you down underground to these mysterious sites. every morning, every afternoon, free to do as you will with our guidance, of course. We will give you tools to make it the best trip to Rome, the best trip to Italy you've ever had in your life. And we hope that if it interests you, you'll get in touch. You can find details in the show notes, or you can go to our website, thebittersweetlife.net. And you can also send us an email, ask your questions. We're here for it. bittersweetlifepodcast@gmail.com. And we're also on social media. Instagram, look for the Bittersweet Life Podcast. On Facebook as well, and you'll find us. All right, everyone go smell a statue. We're going to leave it there. And until next time, this is The Bittersweet Life. I'm Kitty Sewell.
I'm Tiffany Parks.
Join us again. Bye.